Hey everyone, welcome back. You know the drill, you're prepping for UPSC, and staying on top of crucial issues like this one is it's key. Today we're doing a deep dive into India's soil health. We're looking at a piece from Business Standard and, well, let's just say it raises some serious questions, even with all those record grain harvests we've been seeing.
Yeah, it really is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? We see these big harvests, but under the surface, there's a potential crisis brewing. This Business Standard piece actually reports that a whopping 30% of India's land is already degraded.
Wow, 30%, that's huge. And obviously this is a big deal for a country like India aiming for, food security and sustainable growth. I mean, that's a number that should make any UPSC aspirant pay attention, right?
Absolutely. And soil is important, obviously, but for the exam, how deep do we actually need to go with this?
Yeah, I mean, we all know plants grow in it, so it's important. But is that enough for UPSC?
Well, remember, the UPSC isn't just testing what you know. They want to see if you can connect the dots between different issues. And soil, that's the perfect example. It's not just about agriculture. It's tied to environmental conservation, food security, even climate change. All these topics pop up across prelims and mains.
So it's less about memorizing all the soil types and more about getting the bigger picture.
Exactly. Look at the alluvial soil in the Indo-Gangetic Plains. It's fertile, great for rice and wheat, but intensive farming is really taking its toll. And that links directly to questions about sustainable agriculture and the environmental impact of, the food we choose to eat.
Makes sense. And what about the fact that different soil types support different crops? Like,
Hmm.
we all know black soil in Maharashtra is good for cotton. Do we need to know stuff like that for the exam?
Definitely. Understanding India's diverse soil types, how they shape the agricultural landscape, how they affect regional economies, and even historical land use, that's all super relevant for UPSC.
Okay, so diversity is key. But the Business Standard paints a pretty grim picture. They even call it a soil health crisis. What's going on?
Well, it's a multifaceted issue, but a big part of it is, well, unsustainable agricultural practices. The Green Revolution, sure, it boosted yields, but it also led to the overuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and monocropping. All of that throws off the balance of the soil ecosystem.
It's like we've become addicted to these quick fixes, right? Pumping the soil full of chemicals without thinking about the long-term effects.
Yeah.
And the Business Standard, they specifically call out the overuse of urea.
Yeah, and they point to this skewed NPK ratio we have in India, 7.7.3.1.1. It's way too heavy on nitrogen because of all the urea. Ideally, it should be closer to 4.2.1 for a balanced nutrient supply. Overusing urea, it depletes other vital nutrients, degrades the soil, and hurts long-term fertility.
So this imbalance, it hurts the soil, and it makes farmers, well, dependent on buying more and more
Yeah.
fertilizer, right?
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle. And then there's the environmental impact, too. Excess fertilizer doesn't just disappear, it leaches into groundwater, contaminates water sources, and even contributes to, greenhouse gases.
Okay, so we've got these unsustainable practices. The Business Standard also mentions soil erosion and desertification. What's the link there?
Well, think of the Dust Bowl in the U.S. All that fertile land turning into barren wasteland. It's a stark reminder of what happens when we don't care for our soil. Deforestation, overgrazing, even unsustainable mining. All of those strip away the topsoil, leave the land vulnerable to erosion. The soil literally blows away, which hurts agriculture and increases the risk of dust storms. It even impacts public health.
It's a pretty disturbing image, seeing fertile land turn to dust. And then there's salinization, which the Business Standard says is a particularly bad in places like Punjab and Haryana. How does that fit into this whole crisis?
Think of it as a double whammy. Over-irrigation, especially with bad drainage, leads to a buildup of salts in the soil. Then the land becomes infertile, crop yields plummet, and it makes things even tougher for farmers already dealing with degraded soil. It shows that too much water, applied the wrong way, can be just as harmful as too little.
So we've got this complex mix of unsustainable practices, erosion, and salinization, all contributing to a crisis that threatens India's food security and the livelihoods of, millions of farmers.
Yeah.
But for us UTSC folks, what's the main takeaway here? How do we connect this to the exam?
The key is to remember that this isn't just an environmental problem. It has huge socioeconomic consequences. Soil degradation directly impacts farmers' incomes, food prices, and how people in rural areas make a living. It can lead to indebtedness, migration, and even social unrest. Remember, the UPSC is increasingly focusing on the human impact of environmental issues.
Right? It's not just about abstract concepts. It's about real people dealing with real challenges. And on top of everything else, climate change is making this whole situation even more complex, isn't it?
Absolutely. Climate change is like a threat multiplier. It makes existing problems worse. Unpredictable rainfall, droughts, floods, rising temperatures, they all take a toll on soil health. Remember those devastating floods in Himachal Pradesh back in 2023? They led to massive topsoil loss, further impacting agricultural productivity in the region.
So climate change is like adding fuel to the fire. It's a pretty grim picture we've painted so far. But are there any signs of hope? What can be done to reverse this and, restore our soil health?
Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. There are solutions, and that's where things get really interesting, especially from a UPSC point of view. Remember, the mains exam often wants to see solutions, not just problem descriptions.
Okay, so let's get into those solutions then. What are some key strategies for tackling this crisis?
One of the biggest shifts we need is moving away from this reliance on chemical fertilizers and embracing integrated nutrient management, or INM. It's about giving the soil what it needs, a balanced diet. Combining organic manure, biofertilizers, and using synthetic fertilizers, but judiciously. This way, we can replenish nutrients without messing up the natural ecosystem. The business standard even suggests promoting things like nano-urea and other organic alternatives to reduce our reliance on conventional urea.
So it's about being more strategic with fertilizer use rather than just dumping chemicals everywhere, right? Makes sense. I've also heard about agroforestry and perennial crop systems. How do those fit in?
Those are great examples of what the UPSC loves nature-based solutions. Agroforestry is basically integrating trees with agricultural crops. It's like mimicking a natural forest where trees provide shade, prevent erosion, and improve soil fertility with their leaf litter. And perennial crops, unlike annuals, they have deeper root systems that bind the soil and prevent erosion.
It's like using nature to heal the damage we've caused. The business standard also mentions zero tillage and conservation agriculture as promising techniques. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Sure. Zero tillage minimizes soil disturbance. So instead of plowing, you sow seeds directly into the soil, which helps preserve its structure and moisture. Conservation agriculture encompasses a whole set of practices like zero tillage, crop rotation, and cover crops, all with the goal of protecting and improving soil health. For example, there's the happy seeder technology being used in Punjab and Haryana. It lets farmers sow wheat directly into the paddy stubble without burning it, which addresses both soil health and air pollution concerns.
So it's about being more gentle with the soil, working with it instead of against it. But technology alone can't fix this, right? What about policy changes and awareness campaigns?
You're absolutely right. Technology is a tool, but it needs direction from good policies and support from communities who understand the problem. The business standard actually points out that some current policies, like the Soil Health Card program, while well-intentioned, haven't been that successful because of a lack of awareness and, effective implementation.
Sounds like a classic case of a good idea that's struggling to actually make an impact. So what needs to change? How do we make these solutions actually work?
We need a multi-pronged approach that combines technological solutions with policy reforms and community empowerment. We'll go deeper into those strategies and explore some exciting new approaches right after this. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back and ready to talk solutions, especially the ones that, could really make a difference for India's soil and for those of us prepping for the UPSC.
Right. And remember, the UPSC, they're looking for people who can do more than just identify a problem. They want to see you understand the solutions, how feasible they are, all that.
You mentioned community empowerment before the break. I'm really curious about that. How can we involve farmers, use their knowledge and experience to help fix this soil crisis?
Well, India's got this long tradition of sustainable farming, practices that have been passed down for generations. The business standard mentions things like Zai pits in Rajasthan. Farmers dig these little pits to collect rainwater and organic matter. Or vermiculture in the Northeast, using earthworms for composting. These methods have worked for ages, but sometimes get forgotten when people focus on modern, high-input agriculture.
So it's not always about some new technology.
Right.
It's about recognizing the wisdom that's already there.
Exactly. And that's where community-based conservation comes in. Empowering local communities to manage their own soil, using their traditional knowledge and adapting it to current challenges. That can be way more effective than a top-down approach.
Makes sense. Farmers are the ones working the land every day. They understand it best. But how do we go about empowering them?
The business standard points to a couple of good initiatives. There are Krishi Vijnan Kendras. They act as knowledge hubs, connecting scientific research with what farmers are doing. And then there are farmer producer organizations, or FPOs, which help farmers access resources together, share knowledge, and, adopt sustainable practices as a group.
So it's about building networks where farmers can learn from each other and from the experts, a collaborative approach to solving this.
Exactly. It's recognizing that farmers aren't just passively receiving information, they're actively involved in finding solutions. This participatory development approach is something you see a lot in the UPSC syllabus.
Good to know. Even with all these solutions, though, it's kind of overwhelming. 30% of India's land degraded, that's a massive problem to solve.
It is a huge challenge, no doubt. But think about it. Small changes, if enough people adopt them, can have a big impact. And there's some really innovative approaches out there that offer hope for large-scale restoration.
Now, that's what I want to hear. Tell me more about these innovative approaches.
Well, one of the most promising is regenerative agriculture. It's not just about keeping the soil healthy. It's about actually rebuilding it, regenerating degraded soils, boosting their fertility and biodiversity, basically reversing the damage and creating a system that's more resilient and productive.
That sounds incredible. But how does it work? Is this some kind of high-tech solution?
No, it's not about high tech, it's more about a different way of thinking. Regenerative agriculture involves a bunch of practices, a lot of which we've already talked about. Zero tillage, cover cropping, crop rotation, integrating livestock into the system. But it's bigger than any one technique. It's a whole mindset shift, working with nature, not against it.
So it's about mimicking natural ecosystems, seeing how everything's connected, and finding a balance that's good for the land and for the people who depend on it.
You got it. The business standard talks about zero-budget natural farming, or ZBNF is a good example. It's gaining ground in Andhra Pradesh, and the focus is on eliminating external inputs like chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Instead, they rely on local resources and natural processes to improve soil fertility.
That's really interesting. So it's about reducing reliance on expensive inputs and helping farmers be more self-sufficient using what they already have.
Exactly. And the results have been pretty impressive, not just for soil health, but also for farmers' incomes and, making them less vulnerable to market ups and downs.
Sounds like a win-win for the environment and for farmers. That's definitely something the UPSC would be interested in: sustainable, scalable, and effective. Are there other examples of regenerative agriculture happening in India?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Permaculture is getting more popular. It's all about designing these self-sustaining, resilient systems by copying natural patterns. And then there's the growing movement toward organic farming, which avoids synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and relies on natural inputs and ecological processes. All of these approaches understand that healthy soil is essential for a truly sustainable agriculture system.
These are great examples, but it seems like they're all pretty small scale. How do we scale these solutions up to deal with a nationwide crisis?
That's the big question, isn't it? Scaling up needs a multifaceted approach. First, we need policies that support these sustainable practices and make it less appealing to do the harmful ones. The business standard suggests shifting fertilizer subsidies towards organic inputs and regenerative practices. That would send a strong message to farmers.
So, using policy to encourage positive change. What else needs to happen?
Well, we need more investment in research and development, to adapt these practices to different regions and cropping systems. India's agricultural landscape is incredibly diverse, so a one-size-fits-all solution just won't work.
It's like tailoring the approach to the specific local conditions.
Oh.
That's key for making these solutions work long term.
Absolutely. And I think this is the most important part. We need to invest in education and awareness campaigns.
Mhm.
If we want to see large-scale change, farmers need to understand and embrace these new approaches.
It's about empowering them with knowledge and making them active participants in this shift towards a more sustainable future.
Exactly. And platforms like this podcast can play a role in that. By sharing information, getting conversations started, connecting people with different perspectives, we can all contribute to this movement towards a more resilient and sustainable agricultural landscape in India.
Well said. This deep dive has been incredibly interesting, but it also feels like we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's come back to the big picture. The future of farming in India. What does that look like, and what role can each of us play in shaping it? So we're back and thinking about the future. What kind of agricultural landscape do we want to see in India? And how can we, each of us play a role in creating that future?
Yeah, those are the big questions, right? The choices we're making now, they're going to shape the future of India's food security, its environment, and the lives of so many farmers. We're at a turning point, and the path we choose will have consequences for generations to come.
So what does a sustainable and resilient agricultural future for India actually look like?
Imagine, farms that are more than just about producing as much as possible. Farms that are full of life, not just rows and rows of the same crop, but diverse ecosystems, where trees, livestock, even microorganisms all have a role to play. And imagine farmers who have the knowledge and the resources to make smart choices that are good for their livelihoods and good for the environment.
It's a vision of abundance, but not just in terms of how much food we're growing. It's about quality, diversity, and, a sense of harmony between people and nature.
Exactly. And this vision, it's not some impossible dream, it's achievable. We've talked about a lot of the pieces already. Regenerative agriculture, agroecology, bringing back traditional knowledge, empowering communities, supportive policies, smart technology. It's about combining all of those things to create a system that works for everyone, people, and the planet.
So it's not just about adopting a few new practices. It's about changing the way we think about agriculture, our relationship with nature, how we define success, all of that.
Exactly. We need to move past this idea that productivity is the only thing that matters. We need to think more holistically, recognizing how everything in the ecosystem is connected. Healthy soil, it's not just an input for agriculture, it's the foundation of the whole system.
And this shift, it's going to take all of us working together, right?
Yeah,
It's not just what happens on individual farms, it's the choices we make as consumers, policymakers, researchers, even just citizens.
absolutely. Every single one of us has a role to play in making this future a reality. As consumers, we can choose organic produce, cut down on food waste, and support local farmers markets. Policymakers can create incentives that encourage sustainable practices and invest in research and development. Researchers can come up with new solutions tailored to India's diverse needs. And as citizens, we can talk about these issues, raise awareness, and push for policies that prioritize soil health and a more just and sustainable food system.
So it's a journey we take together, a shared responsibility to make sure future generations inherit a healthy and productive agricultural landscape.
Exactly. And it's not just about solving problems, it's about creating a better future. One where producing food goes hand in hand with caring for the environment, social justice, and well-being for everyone. It's about building a food system that nourishes us in every way, not just physically.
I like that. This deep dive into India's soil health has been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've seen some alarming stats, tackled some complex challenges, and explored some innovative solutions. But I think it all leaves us with a sense of hope and a call to action.
Absolutely. The challenges are there for sure, but the possibilities for positive change are huge. It starts with each of us understanding how important soil is, recognizing how our actions are all connected, and making choices that support a sustainable future.
Well said. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into India's soil health crisis. We hope you learned something new. We encourage you to check out the full Business Standard article for more information. And remember, this isn't just some abstract topic for your UPSC exams. It affects all of us. Stay informed, get involved, and let's work together to make sure India's soil, the foundation of our agriculture, stays healthy and productive for generations to come. If you have any questions or you want to dive deeper into anything we talked about, leave a comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives into critical issues. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep working towards a better future.